Before we dive into this incredible story, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and hit that bell icon so you never miss amazing stories like this one. Now, let's begin. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Reeves had seen combat in 7 different countries over his 15-year career with the Navy SEALs. He had led teams through jungles, deserts, and urban war zones. He thought he had experienced everything that modern warfare could throw at him. But on a cold October night in the mountains of Afghanistan, something happened that would challenge everything he thought he knew about combat. It started with a question that no one could answer, and it ended with the appearance of a soldier that nobody could explain. The mission briefing had seemed straightforward. Marcus and his 12-man SEAL team were tasked with capturing a high-value target who was hiding in a remote mountain compound. Intelligence indicated the target had minimal security, perhaps 10 or 12 fighters. The compound was isolated, which worked in their favor. They would insert by helicopter, under cover of darkness, conduct the raid, and extract before enemy reinforcements could arrive. Marcus had run dozens of similar operations. This should have been routine. The team inserted 5 kilometers from the target compound. They moved through the mountains in complete silence, communicating only through hand signals and night vision equipment. The terrain was brutal, all steep slopes and loose rocks that threatened to send them tumbling with every step. The air was thin at this elevation, making every breath a conscious effort. But these men were the best of the best. They moved like ghosts through the darkness, leaving no trace of their passage. As they approached the compound, something felt wrong to Marcus. He couldn't put his finger on it, but his instincts were screaming warnings. The compound sat in a valley surrounded by rocky ridges. Intel photos had shown basic security, a few guards walking the perimeter. But as Marcus scanned the area through his scope, he saw more movement than expected. Many more guards. He counted at least 30 armed fighters, maybe more. This was supposed to be a simple snatch and grab. Instead, they were looking at a heavily defended position. Marcus made the call to pull back and reassess. But before his team could withdraw, everything went wrong. Floodlights suddenly illuminated the valley. Gunfire erupted from multiple positions around the compound. They had been expected. Someone had leaked their mission, or the enemy had better intelligence than anyone realized. Marcus and his team were caught in the open with nowhere to hide. They scrambled for cover behind rocks as bullets tore through the air. Around them, the team established a defensive perimeter on a rocky outcrop. They were pinned down with enemy fighters advancing from 3 sides. Marcus called for air support, but the weather was deteriorating rapidly. High winds and low clouds meant helicopters couldn't reach them for at least 2 hours. 2 hours was an eternity in combat. Marcus did the math in his head. They had ammunition, but not enough for a sustained firefight against superior numbers. They had cover, but the enemy had the high ground. They were in serious trouble. His radio operator, a young SEAL named Davis, was working frantically to establish better communications with command. The mountains played havoc with radio signals, and they were barely maintaining contact. Marcus heard Davis report their position and the enemy strength they were facing. The response from command was not encouraging. All available aircraft were committed to other operations. They were on their own until the weather cleared enough for extraction. Marcus looked at his men, seeing the same grim determination he felt. They would hold this position or die trying. The firefight intensified as dawn approached. Enemy fighters were probing their defenses, testing for weak points. Marcus rotated his men to conserve ammunition, making sure no one expended their magazines too quickly. His second-in-command, Chief Petty Officer Jake Morrison, was a steady presence, moving between positions to check on the team. Jake had been in the teams longer than Marcus and had saved his life more than once. If anyone could help them survive this, it was Jake. Then something strange happened. An enemy fighter who had been advancing on their left flank suddenly dropped. Marcus hadn't fired. Jake hadn't fired. None of his men in that sector had taken the shot. Through his scope, Marcus could see the clean entry wound in the fighter's head. It was a precise kill shot from an elevated position. But there was no one on their team in an elevated position. Marcus scanned the ridgelines around them, searching for the shooter. He saw nothing but rocks and shadows. Another enemy fighter fell, then another. Each time, the shot came from a different angle, making it impossible to pinpoint the shooter's location. The enemy fighters began to panic, spinning around to search for this invisible threat. Their coordinated advance fell apart as they scattered for cover. Marcus grabbed his radio and switched to the team frequency. He asked who was taking those shots. The responses came back one by one. Every member of his team accounted for, and none of them had fired. Jake moved up beside Marcus, his face showing the same confusion Marcus felt. They watched as two more enemy fighters dropped in quick succession. The shots were coming from impossible angles, from positions that should have been out of range for standard rifles. Marcus had worked with the best snipers in the military. He knew what they were capable of. But this was something beyond any sniper he had ever seen. The shots were too precise, too quick. Coming from too many different positions, the enemy fighters were in full retreat now, abandoning their assault and fleeing back toward the compound. Marcus wanted to feel relieved, but instead he felt a growing sense of unease. Someone was out there helping them, someone with extraordinary skills. But who? There were no other friendly forces in this area. Intelligence had been clear about that. They were alone in these mountains. Yet someone was watching over them, protecting them with lethal precision. As the sun rose higher, the firing stopped. The valley fell silent except for the wind whistling through the rocks. Marcus ordered his team to maintain their positions while he tried to figure out what had just happened. Davis reported that extraction helicopters were finally inbound, expected to arrive within 30 minutes. They just had to hold out a little longer. But Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He scanned the surrounding ridges through his scope, searching for any sign of movement. Then he saw something that made his blood run cold. On a ridge approximately 800 meters away, a figure stood silhouetted against the dawn sky. Even at this distance, Marcus could tell it was a person, tall and lean, holding what appeared to be a sniper rifle. The figure stood completely still, seemingly unconcerned about being exposed. Marcus raised his hand in a wave, a gesture of thanks to whoever had saved their lives. The figure remained motionless for a long moment, then turned and disappeared behind the rocks. Marcus blinked, wondering if exhaustion and stress had made him see things that weren't there. The extraction helicopters arrived in a thunder of rotor blades and downdraft. Marcus and his team boarded quickly, maintaining security until the last man was aboard. As the helicopters lifted off, Marcus stared out at the ridgeline where he had seen the figure. There was nothing there now, just empty rocks and morning shadows. Jake settled into the seat beside him, shouting over the noise of the engines. He asked Marcus if he had figured out who their guardian angel was. Marcus shook his head. He had no answers, only questions. Back at the forward operating base, Marcus immediately went to the operations center to file his after-action report. The intelligence officer, a captain named Stevens, listened to his account with increasing skepticism. Stevens pulled up satellite imagery of the area, trying to find any evidence of another friendly presence. The satellites showed nothing. No heat signatures, no movement. Nothing that would indicate another person had been in those mountains. Stevens suggested that perhaps the enemy fighters had been engaged by their own forces in some kind of internal conflict. Marcus knew that wasn't what happened, but he couldn't prove otherwise. Over the next few days, Marcus became obsessed with finding answers. He reviewed every piece of intelligence about the area. He interviewed local sources. He checked with every special operations unit in the theater to see if anyone had teams operating in that region. Everything came up empty. No one had been there. No one was supposed to be there. Yet someone had saved his team, killing at least 7 enemy fighters with precision shots that defied explanation. Jake tried to convince Marcus to let it go. They had survived. That was what mattered. But Marcus couldn't let it go. He had built his career on understanding the battlefield, on knowing where his people were and what they were doing. This unknown sniper represented a gap in his knowledge that bothered him deeply. More than that, he felt a debt of gratitude to whoever had helped them. He wanted to say thank you properly, soldier to soldier. A week after the mission, Marcus was reviewing old intelligence reports when he found something interesting. Over the past 6 months, there had been at least a dozen incidents across the region where coalition forces had reported mysterious assistance during firefights. enemy fighters dropping from unexplained gunfire, ambushes that fell apart due to precision shooting from unknown positions. Each report had been filed away and forgotten, written off as confusion in the chaos of combat. But when Marcus laid them all out on a map, a pattern emerged. All the incidents occurred within a 100-kilometer radius. All involved similar descriptions of impossible shots from unknown positions. All occurred in remote mountain areas where no friendly forces were supposed to be operating. Marcus showed his findings to Jake, who studied the map with growing interest. Jake suggested they needed to talk to someone with more experience, someone who had been in the region longer and might have heard rumors or stories. They needed to talk to the CIA station chief, weathered operator named Collins, who had spent 30 years in the intelligence community, met with them in a secure room. Marcus laid out his evidence and his theory that someone was operating independently in the mountains, engaging enemy forces without any official sanction or support. Collins listened without interruption, his face revealing nothing. When Marcus finished, Collins was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked a question that changed everything. He asked if Marcus believed in ghosts. Collins explained that the story went back almost 10 years. A Marine scout sniper named Thomas Keller had deployed to Afghanistan as part of the initial invasion force. Keller was an exceptional marksman, one of the best the Marines had ever produced. He could make shots that other snipers considered impossible. During his first deployment, Keller's unit was ambushed in the mountains. Most of his team was killed. Keller survived, but was severely wounded. He was evacuated and spent months recovering at a military hospital. What happened next was unclear, Collins said. Keller was medically retired from the Marines due to his injuries. He should have returned to the United States. Instead, according to reports that were never confirmed, Keller disappeared. Some said he went back to Afghanistan on his own. Others said he never left, that he had been living in the mountains since his unit was killed. The official position was that Keller died in a climbing accident in Colorado 2 years after his discharge. There was a funeral and everything. But Collins said there had always been rumors. Marcus asked what kind of rumors. Collins pulled out a file that was marked with classifications Marcus had never seen before. Inside were reports from various sources: Afghan villagers, coalition soldiers, even captured enemy fighters. They all told similar stories about a phantom sniper who appeared during battles, who killed Taliban and Al-Qaeda fighters with impossible accuracy, who protected villages from insurgent attacks. The locals called him different names: the White Ghost, the Mountain Shadow. The Americans called him Echo, because he appeared and disappeared like an echo in the mountains. Some reports claimed Echo operated completely alone, living off the land and salvaging equipment from battlefields. Other reports suggested he had established relationships with friendly Afghan tribes who provided him food and shelter. A few reports even claimed he had trained local fighters, teaching them advanced tactics. But every attempt to locate him or confirm his existence had failed. He was like smoke in the wind, there one moment and gone the next. Collins said the intelligence community had debated for years about whether Echo was one person or multiple people, or perhaps just a myth created from battlefield confusion. Marcus studied the reports, his mind racing. If this was true, if Keller was still alive and operating in the mountains, then he had been doing it for nearly a decade. Alone, without support, without resupply, without rest. It seemed impossible. But Marcus had seen what he had seen. Those shots had been real. The dead enemy fighters had been real. Someone was out there, and that someone had saved his team. Marcus looked at Collins and said he wanted to find Echo. He wanted to bring him in, get him proper medical care, and help him come home. Collins shook his head sadly. Many people had tried to find Echo over the years. Special forces teams had spent weeks searching areas where he had been reported. Intelligence officers had offered rewards for information. Nothing had worked. If Echo didn't want to be found, he wouldn't be found. Collins suggested that maybe Echo didn't want to come home. Maybe the mountains were his home now. Maybe he had his own reasons for staying, reasons that outsiders couldn't understand. Marcus refused to accept that. Every soldier deserved the chance to come home. Against Collins' advice, Marcus began planning an operation to locate Echo. He studied the map, looking for patterns in the sightings. Most occurred along certain mountain ranges that formed natural corridors through the terrain. Echo was moving through these mountains systematically, appearing wherever coalition forces or friendly villagers needed help. If Marcus could predict where Echo would appear next, he could be there waiting. Not to capture him, but to talk to him, soldier to soldier, to offer him a way home if he wanted it. Marcus convinced his command to authorize a reconnaissance patrol into the mountains. Officially, they were gathering intelligence on enemy movement patterns. Unofficially, Marcus was hunting for a ghost. He selected a small team for the mission, just himself, Jake, and 2 other SEALs he trusted completely. They inserted by helicopter into a remote valley that had seen multiple Echo sightings. The plan was simple. They would establish an observation post and wait. If Echo was operating in this area, sooner or later he would appear. 3 days passed with nothing but wind and silence. They watched the valleys and ridges through their scopes, cataloging every movement. They saw mountain goats and eagles, but no people. Marcus began to wonder if Collins had been right, if this was a fool's errand. Then on the 4th day, they observed a group of Taliban fighters moving through the valley below. The fighters were heavily armed and moving with purpose toward a village that housed families friendly to coalition forces. Marcus faced a decision. Their mission was reconnaissance only. But he couldn't sit and watch while innocent people were murdered. Marcus radioed their position to command and requested permission to engage. Permission was denied. They were too far from support, and command didn't want to risk the team. Marcus watched the Taliban fighters getting closer to the village. He was preparing to disobey orders when something happened. The lead Taliban fighter dropped, then another. The precision shots came from somewhere on the opposite ridge. Echo had appeared. The Taliban fighters scattered, returning fire at shadows. Marcus grabbed his scope and scanned the ridge where the shots were coming from. They're moving between rocks with fluid grace. It was a figure in mismatched clothing that seemed to blend with the mountain terrain. Even through the scope, Marcus couldn't make out details. The figure moved to a new position and fired again, dropping another Taliban fighter. The remaining Taliban fighters fled, abandoning their weapons in their panic. As quickly as he had appeared, Echo vanished. Marcus made a split-second decision. He told his team they were going after him. They moved quickly but carefully across the valley and up the opposite ridge. Marcus followed the path he had seen Echo take, looking for any sign of passage. He found a spot where the rocks showed scuff marks from boots, a position that offered perfect sight lines to where the Taliban had been. Embedded in the rock was a single spent cartridge casing. Marcus picked it up, noting that it was from a rifle round, but showed signs of being reloaded multiple times. Someone surviving on salvaged equipment. Jake called out softly. He had found something. A narrow trail leading higher into the mountains, barely visible unless you knew what to look for. Marcus studied the trail, knowing that following it meant abandoning their observation post and potentially getting lost in some of the most unforgiving terrain on Earth. But this might be his only chance to find Echo. He made the call. They would follow the trail. They moved up the mountain single file, weapons ready. The trail wound between massive boulders and along cliff edges that dropped hundreds of feet. This was not a path for the inexperienced or the afraid. After an hour of climbing, they emerged onto a small plateau. At the far end, barely visible against the rock face, was the entrance to a cave. Marcus signaled his team to spread out and approach carefully. They had no idea what they might find. As they got closer, Marcus noticed things that suggested someone lived here. A small solar panel barely visible among the rocks. Empty ration packages buried under stones. A water collection system fashioned from scavenged tarps. Someone had created a home here, hidden from the world. Marcus approached the cave entrance and called out, identifying himself as American military, saying he meant no harm. A voice came from the darkness of the cave, rough from disuse, but speaking clear English. The voice told them to stop where they were and put down their weapons. Marcus recognized the tone of command, the voice of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Marcus said they would lower their weapons, but not disarm completely. Not until they could talk face to face. After a long pause, the voice invited Marcus to enter alone. Jake protested, but Marcus shook his head. This was what they came for. He slung his rifle over his shoulder and walked slowly into the cave. Inside, as his eyes adjusted to the dim light, Marcus saw a man sitting on a rock ledge. The man was lean to the point of being gaunt, with a thick beard and long hair pulled back. His clothes were a patchwork of military surplus and local fabrics. But his eyes were alert and sharp, the eyes of someone who missed nothing. On the ground beside him was a sniper rifle that looked like it had been maintained, with obsessive care despite obvious age and hard use. The man studied Marcus for a long moment before speaking. He asked why Marcus was looking for him. Marcus explained everything. The firefight, the mysterious shots that saved his team, intelligence reports, the stories about Echo. He said he had come to say thank you and to offer help if it was wanted. The man listened without expression. When Marcus finished, the man was quiet for a moment. Then he confirmed what Marcus suspected. He was Thomas Keller, or at least he had been once. That person seemed like someone from a different life now. He asked Marcus what kind of help he thought he could offer. Marcus said they could bring him home, get him medical care, help him reconnect with family. Keller smiled sadly at that. He said his family thought he was dead, that they had grieved and moved on. What good would it do to resurrect a ghost? Besides, he had work to do here. There were still enemy fighters in these mountains. There were still villages that needed protection. The war wasn't over, even if politicians pretended it was. Marcus argued that one man couldn't fight forever, that eventually age or injury would catch up with him. Keller shrugged and said he would keep fighting until that day came. Marcus tried a different approach. He said that what Keller was doing was incredible, but imagine how much more he could accomplish with support. With proper equipment, intelligence, medical care, Keller could work with coalition forces, coordinate his efforts, multiply his impact. Keller shook his head. He had tried working within the system once. The system got his friends killed with bad intelligence and political decisions made by people who had never seen combat. Out here, alone, he made his own decisions. He chose his own fights, and he slept better for it. The conversation continued for over an hour. Marcus found himself respecting Keller, understanding his choice even while disagreeing with it. Keller had created his own war, his own mission. He had found purpose in these mountains that he couldn't find anywhere else. Marcus finally asked if there was anything Keller needed. Supplies, ammunition, medical equipment. Keller considered the offer, then gave Marcus a list of items, simple things that couldn't be easily salvaged. Marcus promised to arrange a drop, no questions asked, no tracking devices. Keller nodded his appreciation. As Marcus prepared to leave, Keller said something that stuck with him. He said that everyone finds their own way to serve, their own way to make peace with the things they've seen and done. For some people, that meant going home and building a normal life. For others, it meant staying in the fight. Neither way was wrong. They were just different paths to the same destination. Marcus understood then that Keller wasn't lost. He had found himself in these mountains. The question was whether Marcus could accept that. Marcus rejoined his team, and they made their way back down the mountain. He filed a report that said they found no evidence of Echo's existence, just rumors and shadows. The requested supplies were dropped by drone a week later at coordinates Marcus provided. He never knew if Keller received them, but over the following months, reports continued to come in. Enemy fighters falling to precision shots. Ambushes that fell apart for no apparent reason. Villages saved from attacks by an invisible guardian. Echo was still out there, still fighting his private war. And Marcus found comfort in knowing that somewhere in those mountains, a phantom sniper was watching over those who couldn't watch over themselves. Some soldiers come home to parades and medals. Others become legends whispered around campfires. Thomas Keller had chosen his path, and in his own way, he was still serving with honor.